We kick it off with this. Renowned poet and activist Don Mattera has passed away at the age of 86. Now, he'll be buried in accordance with Muslim traditions tonight. Mattera was an activist in the 1950s when black, colored and Indian people were relocated from Johannesburg as part of the apartheid government's Group Areas Act. He subsequently wrote award-winning pieces of literature. Mattera also worked as a journalist at the Sunday Times, Soweto and the then Weekly Mail, which is today known as the Mail and Guardian. Our friends and family have gathered outside the Mattera home tonight ahead of his burial. Our reporter Ahmed Kajee is live for us in fromProtea, Glen in Soweto. Ahmed, good evening to you. Thank you for your time. Of course, all of it has had to move swiftly in order to respect the rights. This is the Muslim religious rights in as far as burials are concerned.
Yes, very much so. That is what we are seeing this evening, and hence the prompt burial of Don Mattera at the Avalon Cemetery in Lenasia in about an hour and a half's time as well. The news that we had received from his passing was just around 4 p.m. this afternoon, and that's more or less when within the next 5 to 6 hours thereafter, within humanly and logistically possible for the burial to then take place. And just a few moments ago, at the start of the show, is exactly when the body of Don Mattera had arrived at his home as well. I'll just take a quick step to the left of the shot, and you will see to the right of your shot, that's exactly where his body had entered in to the home of as well. And over the next probably a next hour and 15 minutes or so, what we will be seeing is family, friends will continue in their prayers. They'll be carrying out, paying their respects and saying their final goodbyes to Don Mattera, and then subsequently we will have a few religious figures, a few members from the Muslim community in this particular area coming through to then receive the body and then transport it to the Avalon Cemetery a bit later on. We will be speaking to various community members a bit later on, and we'll actually try getting them in a few moments' time, Kathy. But as you mentioned earlier, he was an important part of the South African literature community as well, being a renowned poet, a renowned author as well. And what we have seen since those responses coming out from those respective sectors as well, and just to show that his reflection and his impacts that we've actually had within the South African society, the Joburg Theatre had actually announced and unveiled a star at the Joburg Theatre actually for him. This happened just about 2 weeks ago as well. Johannesburg Mayor Humpo Palatsi was one of those who had unveiled that particular star as well. So he had an important part in the South African sector as well. And Kathy, as you mentioned, he also played an important role in the activism sector as well. When the Group Areas Act was implemented in the 1950s, heading into the 1960s, the black, Indian and colored communities were moved from Sophia Town to various other areas around Johannesburg, Westbury, where he grew up as well as Eldorado Park, Soweto, Lenasia. These areas is where these communities, these members from the black, Indian and colored communities were relocated to from the center of Johannesburg, and he was an important part of that struggle to have that changed and to have resistance to those particular regulations which was implemented by the apartheid government. And continuously as a result of that, he actually had then joined the ANC Youth League and continued his activism as well, Kathy. And this is exactly what we will be seeing, at least for the next 90 minutes from his home as well. We will continue speaking to a few community members a bit later on, and as I just step out of shot once again, you will see, Kathy, these family members will continue to engage with their communities and to just engage with the family as well. But Kathy, I'm now just going to bring into the conversation Jenny Jafta. She's the chairperson from the Don Mattera Foundation. Jenny, thanks for your time this evening, and obviously condolences to you, the family, and to the foundation on the passing. Can you maybe just reflect on what his passing means for South Africa on a day where we are celebrating Nelson Mandela?
Thank Thank you for those condolences. Yes, Don's passing is a sad day for us, but also for his community and the broader public and the citizens of this country. Don leaves a void in many forms. Don stood for all the injustices of the apartheid regime. He was an activist, he was an author, he was a journalist. He was passionate and compassionate towards all human beings. So as a humanitarian today, there's a void that is left in our world. The foundation in particular leaves a huge void because he is the patron of this foundation.
What should we as South Africans remember Don by? He's been part of the Literature Society, the activism. What should we be remembering him by?
Well, Don stood first of all for injustice. He spoke out against any form of injustice. He spoke out against any form of brutality against children and young people. He was extremely compassionate, and that was one of the values that Don espoused dearly. So as South Africans, one of the things we could do is emulate that compassion towards all human beings. That's essentially what he stood for. But also, Don was a voice for the oppressed. Don expressed all of his emotions through his literature, through his poetry. He was an ardent journalist and mentored many journalists. And so I think those are some of the areas of his work and his contribution to society that should continue, and this foundation will ensure that it does in various forms.
Jenny, I mean, we have seen him, in many, over the recent decades, being a man in the public space. You being part of his foundation, what was he behind the public spaces?
Don was a father, he was a grandfather, he was a very good listener. But Don was extremely emotional and emotive about what was happening in this world. He, as much as Don was at peace when he passed on, I think there were many things Don would have wished he could have done to change this world. And I think that as a human being, we spent many hours sitting around a table with Don, listening to his poetry, but also his expression of hope for this country. And I think that's what we want to carry forward, hope that there is a better future for all of us in this country, and particularly the children of this country.
Jenny, thanks very much for your time. I don't want to keep you for too long as well. Condolences once again to you and the family. That's Jenny Jafta, one of the chairs from the foundation as well. She's joining us right now to just take us through what he meant for South Africa as well, Kathy. And throughout the rest of the evening, we will be bringing you coverage from outside the home as well. And just to take you what we will be taking place from now until his body leaves his home here in Orlando North. It will be going through to the Lenasia Cemetery, to the Avalon Cemetery rather, out in Avalon, in Lenasia rather, and that's when we will be seeing the Sabri Chisti burial van will be taking his body through. And what we will then be expecting for the rest of the evening, as normal tradition normally would dictate, is there will be a few meals served for close friends and family, and then more prayer services will be carrying on as well. And this would probably carry on for the next coming days as well, as the country as well as the community and Don Mattera's family mourns his death and perhaps even celebrates his life. Kathy.
Ahmed Kajee, indeed, a giant has fallen, and we'll keep you up to date in terms of how the burial then processes of the late Don Mattera are unfolding tonight. You can expect it to be one of the key stories that we cover throughout the rest of the evening.